everyone, Lindsay Ford here, and today we're going to dive into how to create lasting behavior change, especially when it comes to your food and nutrition. I'd say a lot of individuals that are out there, you may be included in this, find certain foods that are really hard to navigate. I'd say these are probably more of the hyper palatable foods, maybe the more comfort-based foods. The other day I was teaching and everyone kind of threw out some foods that were really spoke to them. They were near and dear to their hearts, everything from chicken Alfredo to Oreos to literally cookies and milk. So making connections with different foods, pairing them with something else and having that be something super comforting to them. These foods are most likely the kinds of things that once you start, it's hard to stop. They help soothe us. They can also be coping mechanisms. Food, unfortunately, to some degree can be coping in a good way, because we can think celebration where food isn't just fuel, where we have always traditionally used food as a way to celebrate different occasions, which I think that's great. That's a part of our history. It's a part of different cultures. It can be a very positive, it puts positive perception towards food. What tends to be the trouble zone is when we use food to cope, when food really wasn't or isn't the answer. So instead of sitting with the emotion or sitting in with whatever you're dealing with and handling that stress in a more positive direction, we use food as a way to comfort and soothe. The dopamine response here is what really I'd say is the concerning side of how to then make changes in the future, because dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is very motivating. It's also reward. It is also something that teaches us to seek something. So let's say hypothetically we are dealing with stress in our day and we get home after what was just exhaustion and we sit down and we want to deal with that stress, let's say with going to the pantry, and all of a sudden we see a box of cereal. Oh my gosh, that cereal looks so good. I'm going to have some milk with that. I'm going to sit down, and before you know it, you've had 3 bowls of cereal that probably secreted some dopamine to help reward, and in a sense, what you're doing is you are training yourself to go back to that when you get home after another stressful day. So we can train ourselves to actually engage in certain eating behaviors based off of dealing with stress and then coping with the food. So you've got to think, how can I retrain my brain and my body to literally do something different? There's another part of the brain here called the amygdala, and that's the emotional processing part of the brain that will then send messages to your prefrontal cortex to make a decision. So between dopamine and this amygdala prefrontal cortex relationship, it can train our brain to do something that is actually what I would call a false fix. Read that in a book. It was a really great terminology. Dr. Pamela Peeke kind of goes there with that, is calling it a false fix, which ideally, if we're thinking longevity and sustainability with eating behaviors, using food to cope is not something sustainable. There's only going to be feelings of guilt, shame, and just feeling bad afterwards. And that's not really what food should be doing for your body and for your mind. So what I want to show you guys today is kind of this feedback loop. And what we have here is at the top, we've got a trigger, we've got the action, we've got the reward, and then we've got commitment. So let's say the trigger was, maybe there's a certain individual in your life where the conversations, at the end of it just never tend to sit well. And there's something there that triggers you to feel some sort of stress. That can automatically cue you to then go into a certain eating behavior. It could be picking up fast food on the way home. It could be getting home and opening the bottle of wine. It could be opening up the pantry. Whatever action it is, it will then provide some sort of a reward. This reward being the dopamine response, in essence. That reward is very motivating, where then we all of a sudden get committed and we commit to that action. And then all of a sudden we have this feedback loop here. The problem with this is if we're relying on food to cope, our health, our mental health, our relationship with food really starts to get skewed from what inherently it probably was supposed to be. Food is not just fuel, it also provides different emotions. It does trigger certain things in the brain, which is great. Unfortunately, if you've got a lot of stress in your life, or you're dealing with certain things that always kind of go here to then go here using food as the action, unfortunately, that's when things over time get a little haywire, whether it's going to impact your health, impact relationships, impact other things. Unfortunately, this cycle is exhausting. So how can we actually move forward? One, you've got to figure out what your triggers are. What are your cues? What are the things that really kind of set you off? What can you do differently? So what actions other than food can you do to still give yourself a dopamine response? Fun fact, hugs actually secrete dopamine. It doesn't have to be that, but getting outside, going on a walk, reading a book, journaling, meditation, yoga, anything, calling a friend, anything that's going to get you away from the food, especially if you're using it as that false fix. So find those actions so that you can actually literally, between these two things, retrain your brain and your body to do something different. So now, every time you go back to that trigger and that cue, you've trained yourself to do something different.